Starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the next installment of Recruiting Blog's free webinar series. Our webinar today is courtesy of our great friends at InterviewStream, the original provider of pre-recorded and live video interviewing solutions. InterviewStream offers three core products: live video interviewing, pre-recorded interviewing, and practice interviewing. We're excited to announce that everyone on the call today has been given a free 90-day trial to InterviewStream's one-way messaging platform. It's 100% free and offers an exclusive opportunity to webinar attendees to receive that 90-day offer. Simply check your email after our call today. This session is going to answer some of the most challenging questions people are facing about video interviewing, many of which are probably roadblocks within your organization. We brought in real legal experts to give you real legal answers. To have your questions presented to the panel today, just enter your questions in the question panel in the question box on the right side of your viewing screen. On the call this afternoon, we'll hear from Paul Phillips, CEO of Semzo Multimedia and Staffing Daily, Jared A. Jacobson, LLC, who specializes in labor and employment law, corporate and business law, and sports and entertainment law, as well as real estate legal matters. And Caleb Wood of K&L Gates, specializing in EEOC investigations and OFCCP audits. Today's call will be moderated by Steve Thornberry of InterviewStream. Steve, welcome to the call.
Hey, Tessa, thanks. And again, we're excited to partner with Recruiting Blogs, and we think this very important topic. We certainly appreciate you joining our conversation. And I just want to take a minute to spend a little bit of time and introduce Caleb Wood, associate with K&L Gates. I'm not going to read his bio, but Caleb, welcome. We're excited to have you.
Glad to be here.
I also want to introduce Jared Jacobson with Jared Jacobson, LLC. Jared, again, great bio. And again, Jared, we're really excited that you jumped on the panel.
Thanks, Steve. Happy to be here.
And our third panelist, Paul Phipps, CEO of Semzo Multimedia and Staffing Daily. Again, what we wanted to pull is the industry experts that we think can provide great insight on this really interesting topic as it relates to legal perspectives on video interviewing. Probably one of the biggest questions we receive by talking to some of the biggest companies in the world is how does this actually play in their environment and their ecosystem. So again, all the panelists, welcome. We're certainly glad you're here. And we're going to be excited to hear some of your comments related to these questions.
Thank you very much.
Before we get started we want to open a poll, and we'd like you to actually participate, those who are in attendance, and actually would like to understand your understanding of what video interviewing actually means. So take a minute, take a look at these quick answers, if you don't mind. And just poll real quickly. We'll track this, and can actually provide some great insight into your comments and your thoughts of what video interviewing actually is, and what's the first thing that comes to mind for you. While you're in that polling mode, I would love to invite you to continue the conversation, and invite you to the conversation at our Twitter hashtag #ISLegalChat. And that will be ongoing, so please join that conversation as well. Okay, let's jump right into the first question. We're going to jump right into, and what we've done, we've staggered the questions, and we're going to give each panelist a chance to go first, and each panelist a chance to go last as we go through our question sets. And let's start with what types of considerations need to be made to accommodate special candidate circumstances. And Jared, we're going to start with you first, and just walk us through your thoughts on this, please.
Well, thanks, Steve. I mean, it's an interesting question. It's an interesting topic generally. I suppose it depends, if you're talking about, an individual that has no internet access in a remote urban community or or rural community, excuse me, versus, a candidate that might have some type of qualified disability. For example, someone who might be deaf or blind. And I believe this is more of a technology question, but from a legal perspective, it's an issue as to whether an accommodation is required in the hiring process itself, also beyond after someone's obviously hired and there's determinations made with discipline. And it's true. I mean, the Americans with Disabilities Act applies when there are companies with 15 or more employees, and there's state laws obviously that provide also. But it applies when companies are doing their hiring at the initial stage. So these are considerations that are important for companies, and they can run into some trouble with plaintiff's attorneys if they're not making the right decisions.
Okay, Jared, thanks for that. Paul, what are your thoughts in regards to special candidate circumstances? And again, we position the questions especially related to the use of pre-recorded video interviewing in the process. I need to preface that on the front side. So let me just walk you through that. Paul, what do you think on this?
Well, absolutely, and in every sense, my answer is a pretty simple one. If you need to make all types of considerations. If there's a person who cannot use the technology but is still capable of doing the job and is a really good candidate, then I would say that it's in your best interest to to do whatever you have to do to make sure that they're able to apply for your job and get the job that they're legally allowed to get.
Okay. I think, I think as we walk through our clients and what we work on a global scale, I think one of the important things that we hear on a regular basis is that accommodation availability, or to provide a reasonable access to the process that's being included from the interviewing side. Thanks, Paul. Caleb,
yeah,
last but certainly not in the least, what do you think as it relates to the special candidate circumstances?
I think it's really a situation where you kind of need to have a separate set of procedures that are available. If a person can't because they're, great examples, blind or deaf, so may not be able to hear the video questions, that maybe the company has some sort of procedures where the person can come in and do it in person, and that they can be asked the same questions or have them written, or you could use subtitles. Just really finding ways to set up pretty easy procedures to kind of accommodate select groups so that they're not just cut out of the process if they don't fit nice and tidy into the kind of established easy process.
I'd agree. I think that's really good feedback. And again, all considerations for all candidates, I think, is probably the most effective approach to the process that we're following. We've seen followed throughout in the use of our candidate side. Okay, great. Let's continue this conversation. So let's talk through, and Paul, you're going to be first on this question. So as we work through this process of what we call this pre-recorded interviews, the ability to record questions, send them out to candidates for them to review in a 24-hour window, what do you think are the legal advantages to pre-recorded interviews?
Well, since I'm on a panel of two other attorneys, I'm going to leave the legal section of that to them, but I will. They both have good benefits, and I personally prefer the pre-recorded interviews. I believe that they invite less discrimination and are more efficient than in-person interviews. I say that because the person, conducting the interview, they can't be sidetracked or distracted from asking the same questions to everyone. And also because the interviews are recorded, the recruiter can get a second opinion from a coworker or manager. So if a person does 25 interviews a day, they can go back and revisit the interview and not have to rely on just memory or notes. So I actually believe that they're less discriminatory, and to that advantage.
Okay, so Paul, look, I know you've had vast experience in the space of recruiting, and you've actually gone through this process probably on a large scale. I think some of the groups you've worked with, Manpower, IBM, and some of the larger firms. Have you experienced some of those issues, or the ability to not have that capability of having access or sharing your responses from that candidate with a fellow recruiting manager or a fellow hiring manager?
Well, as in terms of discrimination, one tip I do have for people who might be considering doing this is that they make sure that they use video interviewing consistently. Because if you only use video interviewing for people that have ethnic sounding names or something, then you could be seen as using it in a discriminatory way. So if you're going to use it, you should use it across the board. Actually, once, obviously I've worked many places. I'm not going to say who, but I once saw someone trying to use video interviewing that way. He actually said, I just wanted to make sure they spoke English, which was obviously a red flag that he was trouble for the company. Which brings me to the point of, obviously, if just technology is nothing to be afraid of, and it cannot make decisions for you. It does not care what age or race the interviewee is. Video discrimination only occurs if you or your coworkers practice discrimination.
Great. Well, that's great insight, Paul. We appreciate that. Okay, Caleb, now again, switching to the more legal aspect of it, what do you think are the legal advantages to pre-recorded interviews?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there are some good advantages. Everybody gets asked the same set of questions, and I think that kind of does a couple different things. One, I think the idea that some people have is, the person wrote me off at the beginning of the interview as soon as they saw my race or my age or something like that. But this, and so they cut the interview short and they didn't ask me all the questions and they didn't give me the opportunity to explain these things. And you really avoid that because you've got the kind of consistent questions that everybody gets the opportunity to ask, and everybody gets the opportunity to fully answer and participate. So I think that there's a big advantage in that. And second, with just kind of setting the questions, I think that it's probably going to add a second layer that with the questions, maybe to make sure they don't invite a response that would ask somebody to reveal their some sort of protected information, because I think that they're not off the cuff, thought up questions where somebody has deliberately gone in and built up a series of questions. I think that that's one advantage with the pre-recorded questions, at least.
Okay, that's really great insight. And I know you spent a lot of time working in the defensive clients of EEOC investigations, and you've worked with all the major aspects of employment law. Do you see this as have you seen a recurring theme related to on the employment side?
I haven't dealt with, just the EEOC bringing lots of have really been honed in on the video interviewing. I haven't seen a lot of that from the whole charge perspective. I just haven't seen a lot of charges from employees complaining of the video interviewing process. So maybe that's probably maybe one thing that as it's growing you'll see some more of, and maybe that's one thing that some people are doing right. That there's hopefully less discrimination and less opportunities. So people are feeling like they're getting a fair shake, so they're less likely to bring claims.
Great. Okay. Yeah, because we hear this a lot, and a lot of the large clients, and especially as they vet the technology through their ecosystems over the capabilities of what pre-recorded can provide to their hiring process and the issues related to that. Well, great. That's great, Caleb. Thank you for that. Jared, you're going to weigh in last on this, and so you've heard the other two panelists, and they brought up some very good points. What is your take on the advantages of pre-recorded interviews?
Well, I found a lot of their points interesting. I mean, I suppose the video pre-recorded questions are similar to an application, but essay, an essay form. One of the advantages is that, it keeps away these stray remarks, these uncomfortable and awkward conversations that sometimes take place in interviews, and they go down these paths, and sometimes they lead us to places that can be conversations that's inappropriate and at worst illegal in these hiring circumstances. So I think to script the questions and to have people be comfortable in their own format, answering these questions, however they feel that the question should be answered, I think kind of takes this human element out of it. Which on the other hand, the flip side is you don't have that human element, and I think that sometimes that's important when you're going to be working with somebody regularly. One thing I'm not sure how this works is that if a company wanted to give you an advantage or disadvantage, depending what side you're on, I suppose a company, if can edit some of these questions out. It turns out these questions led to a conversation that aren't appropriate, or the question itself wasn't appropriate. I suppose these recordings can be edited and changed around, which that poses new issues, obviously.
Yeah, we're going to cover that a little bit later in in the Q&A, because we do have some very definitive thoughts around that. I know, Jared, you work with a lot of entrepreneurs and small business and large businesses on various types of employment law and labor law. Have you seen any type of reoccurring issue related to the interviewing of employment perspectives just in general?
So like failure to hire based on protected traits. Nothing with regards to video interviewing. I really haven't come across that. I'm not sure if it's more prevalent in a large company environment, Fortune 500, Fortune 100 versus small mom and pop. And obviously mom and pops, they're not doing too much video interviewing. I could see this coming up with larger companies, and I believe this is how a lot of the employment world is going, moving to independent contractor situations and relationships. So I could see this just coming into play with independent contractors, a lot of interviewing, but the employment laws don't apply the same way in that scenario. So that obviously changes some things too. So I don't see too much of it on the video interviewing side, but there's still failure to hire claims coming up all the time. People slip up because they're human, and a lot of people don't understand what's the correct thing to say and what's not correct and how they can get in trouble. So I don't know if that'll ever change, but the pre-recorded questions could definitely dig into that and script it a little bit better.
No, I agree, and I think one of the things that we have talked to are the number of clients that we talk to on a regular basis, especially on the pre-screening side of the aspect of using pre-recorded, is the ability to ask the consistent question across all channels without fail. So the ability to build a bank of questions that have been vetted. You could actually vet them through your legal department or your legal counsel, and actually provide that question set to the candidates equally across the board, equally across literally the planet relating to specific jobs. Whereas if you provide that same questions to 100 hiring managers in a large ecosystem or a large deployed client set, there's no physical way you can maintain integrity of that question set through those 100 hiring managers without any intention of trying to answer or ask the wrong question, just through inflection or just through how the shortness of which they asked the question or the shortness of which you allowed me to answer the question. So one of the things that we've seen, we think the pre-recorded is a huge aspect of mitigating risk on this screening aspect of the candidate side, because as all of you have indicated, Paul and Caleb and Jared all have indicated, the consistency by which the question can be asked is universal. So there's never disparity in that process, and there's never any concern over that. And you can always edit and change those at will. So we think that's a strategic advantage. And again, I think all of y'all hit the same thing. Well, great. Okay, this is really interesting. So we get, again, lots of companies have used lots of different types of video technology across the globe to interject or input in their ecosystem, their hiring eco process. And so what do you think are the legal implications of using free or unsecured online video platforms, so versus a more secure live video interviewing tool? And this goes to a lot of free tools out there today versus platforms that are specifically designed to accommodate video interviewing on a large scale. So Caleb, this question goes to you first. What do you think there could be any legal implications related to free versus a more secured model?
I think that under some states' laws, you could have some sort of privacy concerns. If a question reveals kind of some confidential information, or you're discussing kind of some key business principles with the person you're interviewing or their ideas of things, and if that's being somehow recorded and out there and somebody gets a hold of that, they may find out, you've got some proprietary hiring styles that you may like, or just discussing your business model, maybe that you wouldn't really be revealing to everybody. So I certainly think that there are some issues just from a company's protecting itself from kind of revealing some of their confidential kind of information during an interview, maybe that they were willing to share with somebody that they're at a farther along hiring stage that maybe they don't want to get out to the general public, or maybe would be confused or taken the wrong way.
No, I think you hit some very interesting points, and the realities are, especially for products out there, there are very simplistic applications you can purchase like Super 1010 for $30 that you can actually record video processes like in Skype and Skype-related type scenarios. So I think you hit upon a very important point, is that that becomes a very, very, I guess, concerning issue related to the recording of such interviews and related issues without some type of control over how that's being used in the future. That's great input, Caleb. Thank you. So, Jared, what do you think about the legal implications of the free or unsecured versus a more secured video platform for this process?
You know, I also agree with Caleb on this point, that, you know, it's definitely a privacy concern. I also have a question or more of a comment regarding like who owns this material, whether from an intellectual property standpoint. The questions are sent over. I suppose the company's using them uniformly, consistently. They own them. The answers, who owns the answers, and what can be done with them? You know, what is, and if the company owns them and the company is requiring the candidates to sign some type of check-the-box form, what does the form say? You know, what's the candidate, you know, giving up in order to have this interview? And if they don't give up certain things, then they're not allowed to have the interview. And perhaps this could disproportionately affect a certain group of people. So I think that's obviously, you know, a concern here. I mean, what type of rights are you giving up, and, you know, who has the rights to this material? And maybe, you know, maybe someone else could comment on that. I'm not really sure the answer to that.
Well, typically, I think the common practice is there's some assumption of terms when you actually participate in an event like this. The company does own the IP in a secured video platform, so the company maintains that response, typically in an ATS or some type of automated model where they can actually track the use and the candidate flow on a larger scale, and even on a smaller scale. They do have access, and that information is completely controlled within their parameters on the secured side. On the unsecured side, I don't know. That's a really great question, and I think that poses a really a valid point. If you do use an unsecured model, surely what is the implications related to the company's stance and the actual candidate stance on who owns that content? If it is recorded unbeknownst to either party, what happens to that process if you're using that model? That's a great question you're asking.
Yeah, it's interesting. It'll
develop. About that. She knows all about that stuff. Sure.
So, okay, Paul, you're weighing in last on this. I mean, do you see any strategic issues related to free and unsecured versus a secured model?
Absolutely. You know, when it comes to the video interview conversation, there's two things that are very important to me. That is consistency and availability. And if you look at the popular free options out there, you've got FaceTime, which only works on Apple devices. You have Google+, which requires users to register with Google and obtain a Gmail account. And then you have Skype, which has some security issues. Actually, a hijack vulnerability was disclosed recently from a Russian hacker website. You know, so even though Skype is really popular, it's probably the most accessible. All of those solutions are not consistent, nor are they necessarily accessible, let alone secure.
Yeah, I think, again, I think the accessibility issue becomes the dominant conversation point when we talk to clients about, you know, what are the strategic advantages versus the free versus the paid. And I think you've all three brought us some very, very important aspects and points related to this again, one of the most common questions we received. And let me just, as an overview, these are the questions that we have received from our clients on a most consistent basis. So what we did, we took these questions, and that's what we included in this initial set as we go through this. We have some more really good questions coming up, but I think it's a really, really great conversation. Okay. So what do you think? And again, Jared, you're back to the driver's seat here. Legal advantages to using video interviewing technology as a screening tool. I mean, walk us through your thoughts related to this. I know we've hit upon it a little bit in the past, but what do you see are any strategic advantages or legal advantages?
As a screening tool?
As a screening tool.
Well, I think there are some. I think there are risks also, but there are obviously some legal advantages. You have an opportunity. Well, I don't know if they're legal advantages, but they're business advantages. You have an opportunity to have conversation with someone who is more comfortable answering questions in their own environment. And I think they're more apt not to go down that path of saying stuff. I mean, the questions are scripted, but they're not going to be bringing up factors that later on they're not the person for the position, that they can't go back to the company and say, this is something that I said, and this is obviously something that was a determination based on this thing that I said. So I think that it's a way of protecting themselves, and the consistency across the board, as was already mentioned, I think is a huge advantage. And as I said, I think that's a great advantage. But I think there's, obviously, as we discussed, there's some risks as well.
Okay, we're going to come back to those risks here in just a minute, because with the next question, I think, really kind of delves into that factor, which we get a lot of questions on. Okay, Paul, what do you see as the legal advantages or even strategic advantages to video interviewing technology as a screening tool?
Well, when I think about legal advantages, a lot of times I think about defending myself from some sort of lawsuit or the fear of that. And so, you have to look at how something like this could benefit you from a defense standpoint. I think that ultimately it can protect the company from both the interviewer and the interviewee. If you have a particular applicant who is going to complain about discrimination, or there are some types, there are some people who do like to do that, whether it's true or not. But now you have the video. So there's no more he said, she said, or just blindly taking your interviewer's word for it. It could be that your interviewer was discriminatory during an interview or during the screening process, during the verbal and telephone screening process. But, a lot of times all you have to do is take their word for it, and they're, on your side. Now, as a business owner, you don't have to do either. It actually can protect you from both parties because not everybody's perfect. But the court is going to want to know what happened in the fullest, truth as possible.
Yeah, very good points. I think that you're hitting upon really the core of what organizations are really trying to understand related to the use of this technology or any new technology that basically changes process or procedure related to especially the hiring side. Great insight. Caleb, what do you think as it relates to the legal advantages here on the use of it as a screening tool?
Sure. I think one pretty good legal advantage is just people know it's being recorded, and I think that does things for the interviewer and the interviewee. I think that is an extra check that the interviewer knows that that's being recorded, so that I think that they're probably going to be more likely to avoid bad questions or questions that may elicit information that they really should be avoiding about people's religion, race, gender, those kind of things. But I think it also avoids the, sometimes some companies feel that maybe somebody's filing a false claim or frivolous claim or making up stuff or saying things that didn't happen in the interview happened. And, I think that this is just another way of saying, oh, really? We've got this clip that shows that there was no inappropriate question asked, or we have this clip that shows, and then, you can show the person was not hired because their questions or because their answers to the questions were terrible and they just didn't meet the qualifications, and that's the reason. And you've got some great video evidence, and then you can, flash up, here's the candidate that we did hire, and, you can just see how much more impressive this person's candidate is, how much fuller their answers are, how much more experience they're able to outline, and then it can be just a pretty good side-by-side comparison that, there was a reason why you hired this person, and it probably comes across when another person looks at it and says, oh, yeah, this clearly was the more qualified person here.
No, I think you raised some really, really, really great points. And because I think that the goal through the process, I think this is one, really great case where technology does equalize the process in a lot of cases where you cannot otherwise impede the process by which your subjective thought is thinking how I was being treated or not being treated through it. I mean, I think that's a huge point. Now, let me ask you a question that's kind of a part B of this question. And again, you've been around the industry a long time. You've seen a lot of things in your careers. Do you believe, and just a quick question, do you think like a solution like this will change the interviewing process forever? And Jared, I'll go back to you.
it's hard to say without there being, enough out there to see how it develops from a business perspective and a legal perspective. I think if the risks can be reduced and costs and expenses can be reduced, I think it's a great opportunity to change it, and it's consistent with the way the world's going. Less, face-to-face, in-person. Now, if you're comparing this to an in-person interview going forward, then I think it's a great equivalent. It gives an in-person interview a run for the money. But if it's being used versus a call, pre-screening call, for example, I'm not sure. There could be more of a risk on that side, obviously, because the alternative is you're not seeing the person, and I think there's a huge, there's advantages and disadvantages to not seeing someone. I'm sure we're going to get into that a little bit more, but it could be the way of the future. It's a great idea.
What do you think, Paul?
I think that considering the EEOC has been endorsing video interviewing, I believe, since 2004, that kind of, helps me with the legal choices. But I think if it, helps make more money, it increases profit, increases efficiency, helps you find better candidate. Of course, it's going to replace the telephone. I think we're all in search of better tools. And, long time ago, telephone screening and interviews were considered strange and impersonal, and, look where we're at now.
And Caleb, you're going to weigh in last here. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think it's coming around to stay, and, I think that some of the concerns that people have, they're the concerns that they would be having either way. People are saying, well, you're seeing their race or their disability if they're in a wheelchair or something in a video interview, but with as much social media, with people checking out people's LinkedIn accounts, I think so much more of that information is already being revealed at an early stage in the application process that I'm not really sure that this really changes it, and this isn't information that wouldn't already be revealed in the process. So I don't think that this really adds a new layer to it most of the time.
Yeah, I think we would agree with that. And one of the things that through this process that is important, we are firm believers that the magic truly does happen in the face-to-face. We are seeing organizations that are struggling, especially in large distributed environments, the ability to screen faster, to cast a wider net for more candidates who may not have been included in the process. We think this can actually be more inclusive and actually offer more candidates opportunities to actually take questions or answer questions 24/7. So, look, we're in the space. However, we have seen this, and we ask that question a lot to our clients. And I think there's a lot of clients who are seeing the strategic value of what this can provide them in levels that we have not even encountered yet. So, again, as a side note question, I appreciate you jumping into that. All three our panelists has a really, really good answer. Okay, so here's where we start getting some pretty interesting firework questions here. Does observing a candidate through a video have any different legal implications than viewing them in person or looking at their LinkedIn account or any social media post? And Caleb, you had just mentioned that as it relates to a view perspective. Paul, we're going to start with you first. I mean, do you think video has a uniquely different avenue compared to a LinkedIn account or a Facebook or even photos tweeted out or posted in other social media venues?
In short, no. No, I think that, again, my beliefs are pretty strong in that the discrimination and the implications, the illegal behavior or any kind of legal problems that may come have nothing to do with the technology that you're using. It's all about the people using it, their standards, your checks and balances in your company, and making sure that nobody is doing anything. So if they, someone wants to go and look at a LinkedIn account, they can be discriminatory. If someone wants to talk to them in person, they can be discriminatory. And if someone wants to do a video interview, they can be discriminatory. It's all about the person and not the technology, in my opinion.
Which is in essence what the original 2004 EEOC document states. As long as you're consistent with your patterns, technology does not really enter into a situation one way or the other, which I know you brought up earlier, was a really good point. Caleb, you brought it up, and from a view perspective, I mean, what do you think about the video versus the actual images of those folks posting their social sites or a LinkedIn account?
From that perspective, when comparing those two things, I really don't think there's much of a difference. When you're talking about an in-person interview versus a video interview, I think that, one area maybe that it could potentially make a difference is if there's some protective group that, maybe doesn't feel comfortable in front of a camera, or that, therefore they're either not going forward with the interviews, or they're just not coming across as well in the video interviews, and they're not being hired. I think that that's something that needs to be kind of looked at, and that kind of a double check to make sure that you're not having some sort of disparate impact on a group because of the video interviewing technique being something that that group may not be comfortable with or may not have the experience with, so that they're either not following through once they've been asked to take the video interview, or they're just not appearing as well and comfortable in the video, and they're ultimately not being hired.
Okay, that's great. We had a recent statistic that came across, I think, and that talked about 90% of corporations now use in the recruiting process LinkedIn as one of their primary ways to actually recruit both active and passive candidates. So, of which you're exposing your experience, which is a traditional resume model, but the images included with that LinkedIn posting, I think, provide some interesting insight into where we see this moving. Okay, Jared, you've had some great insight all along. What do you think about the relationship of the actual image on a social media posting versus like a video post?
I happen to agree with a lot of what Caleb was actually just saying again. What he's referring to is there could be some type of disproportionate, unintended, discrimination occurring if, for example, a certain sect of a religion, for example, can't interview or is uncomfortable, as Caleb pointed out. But from what I've seen, social media is much more voluntary and much more invasive than any video interview probably could be, for a number of reasons. Whether a company would want to be, or if it even makes sense to be. So I think there's just much more out there that people are voluntarily putting out. And as Paul was saying, if the hiring decisions are being made by people that want to judge individuals by these traits that the law chooses, then that's going to happen regardless. And this information is out there. So I think that there's less risk with a video interview than when companies do their normal practice of searching the internet for individuals and their images.
No, I agree. And again, that's without question, that's probably the most aggressive question we receive, is if they're currently actively using any type of social media platform from a recruitment perspective, does that put them in the same position from a video view perspective? So I think it's pretty clear that an image is an image. Okay, so we had a couple questions coming in, and we wanted to ask a few just as they came through. And one of the questions was, how do I address leadership in my firm for a trial video interviewing? I guess the fear is the discrimination of the way individuals look. How would you position that? And Paul, we'll start with you. Is there any particular steps you would take to address leadership of an organization related to the use of video interviewing?
Yeah, absolutely. It actually, has the potential to completely overhaul your entire process. And in that process that you're overhauling, you are able to, fix things that have been, broken that you've been doing for the last 10 years. But at the same time, your own employees might have some kind of problem with change, as many people do. And I think, as long as our leadership makes sure that everyone knows the benefits and that we all see and feel the benefits, then I never really have much of an issue getting people on board with large changes such as these. But I'd say the longer that they've been doing the same older process, probably the harder it is to change it.
Yeah, and so just from a practical point of view, we've had a very storied history in the space, and we're seeing the adoption now on large enterprise shops moving into this model faster probably than anything else, including live, simply because of the risk mitigation related to the ability to ask questions like this. But I think these are really, really great questions. Caleb, we have a question coming in as it relates to, do you need to control who in your organization views recorded interviews? For example, can hiring managers review the recordings, or do we need to have one specific team responsible for this? I think it's a great question.
No, I think that's a great question. I think you need to have some training of people that are going to use and be viewing this video, of the video interview. So, I think that one kind of thought process would be like, well, we've got these interviews, let's send it out to the whole team to get their input. And I think that if you send it to a large group of people that really aren't trained, that I think that there's going to be some risk. But certainly, the HR managers, certainly the decision makers, they should absolutely be, seeing this video and using it, and they should be trained on, how to assess qualifications in relation to a job requirement in viewing videos. That way, when they're viewing a few different videos across, in making sure that their analysis and the reviews is based on the person's answer, not based on some subjective view of the person's characteristics.
Okay, that's great. That's great insight. And another question that came in, Jared, we'll direct this one to you. Communication skills are very important. What is discriminatory about checking their English skills?
Well, there are certain English-only rules that are out there, and the general rule, and this may be state-specific rules might be a little bit different, but the general rule is that unless the job requires what they might call a bona fide qualification of some sort, unless the job requires English only, you can't discriminate against an individual for not speaking the language. And with the market becoming global these days, there's more of a reason why non-English speaking might be acceptable. But I think it really depends on the position. And as I said before, a lot of these jobs are turning over from employee to independent contractor / consultant, and the employment laws don't apply necessarily the same ways. So, as I said, it has to be in English. A retail store, people coming in because the customers want someone speaking English when no speaking to the customers is even required is discriminatory. If someone's sitting on a computer, and I'm giving examples obviously, someone sits on a computer all day and English is not required, it's not necessary that they speak English. But so it's the exception rather than the rule that English-only speaking is necessary for a job.
Well, and there's a part B to that question, if you don't mind. Again, it's great insight, Jerry. We appreciate that. But let me ask you the part B of that question. I think this is pretty interesting. If I'm using pre-recorded video interviewing, how do I legally handle rejecting a candidate if they have speech trouble? So I don't necessarily think it may be like English as a primary language or English as even a second language. What if they have any particular types of speech in related trouble?
Oh, you're speaking of a physical disability, a speech impediment?
I would have to assume based on that's what I think the assumption would be.
Well, again, this goes back to one of the original questions. We were talking about disabilities and making special accommodations. Accommodation would have to be made to understand how, obviously the interviewer that scripted the questions understands the questions, but they're obviously not going to understand the interviewee's responses. And it's going to be difficult for the interviewee to communicate the responses. Perhaps it can be done through a chat box or some other way. But an accommodation would be required in that situation if that interviewee has a qualified disability under the law.
That's great. That's great insight. Okay, a few more questions if you don't mind. I think, Paul, you're up next. Really good question about, are there legal issues related to candidate responses being captured audio only versus video responses that enable recruiters to see applicants and make decisions based on appearance? I think we've answered some of that with the whole appearance issue with social media, but do you think of any other angles here?
Gosh, not particularly. Again, it comes down to, with audio, you're obviously not, if you're a discriminating employee who's doing the recruiting, needs to see a person before they are able to discriminate, then eventually that's going to happen. Maybe audio delays that process if that particular person needs to see a person to discriminate. Obviously, some people can hear accents and still continue to discriminate if that's the kind of person they are, and that's the kind of person we have working with us or for us. So, again, like I've said many times, avoiding having any discriminating people will pretty much eliminate your discrimination risks and issues.
Okay, that's great. So just a few other questions here, then we're going to gather your final thoughts, and we're going to move on. And so one of the questions that one of the questions came through, and I think I'll take this one. I'll share, based on the question set. Can you share how most larger companies are using the interview platform? Is this used during the application process as an assessment tool, or post-application process to or after screening? That's a really great question, and I think there's multiple answers. The majority of the large shops we deal with are seeing and moving into the pre-recorded as a screening aspect, the ability to actually help speed the process of hiring along faster, the ability to talk to more candidates at a larger scale, especially for more, I think, technically skilled positions or specifically skilled positions. So I think they're seeing that benefit simply because of the problems with the screening process today, and just in scheduling a phone screen it can become very cumbersome, especially when you're hiring hundreds of candidates or or filling hundreds of positions for large organizations. It becomes very, very, very concerning. And is it used during the application process as an assessment tool or post-application? Typically, a lot of organizations, they'll screen you through. You'll come through the ATS and qualify through at some level, so that you're already qualified through the ATS related to your skill set, degree, background, requirements, those kind of parameters. And at that point, they use it as that secondary step to actually filter you through yet again. But we're also seeing organizations, especially if you're recruiting from college campuses directly, may use this as a secondary step. So the first step process is actually a physical interview, and the second step can be the pre-recorded to get you into a much deeper thought process related to specific questions that gives you time to actually contemplate and actually give a uniquely different circumstance or presentation of how you'd answer those questions. So it's a combination of events, but I think organizations are, and again, I think, Paul, you were talking about this earlier, just anything that helps organizations become more profitable, more efficient in their process. All organizations are looking at solutions like these because simply they have to compete. And talent, as the market came out, I think the lowest unemployment or the lowest, jobless claims since, I think, 2007. So the market is heating up. We are seeing the squeeze, and so passive hiring will become a much more aggressive model. So, excuse me. Let's wrap up for some final thoughts. We're wrapping up the hour. And so I'll go back to my original sequence. Jared, we'll give you any final thoughts related to this conversation and some of the discussions we've had.
Well, I just have a couple things, I guess, that kind of summarize. I guess you're weighing your costs here versus and what the profits that you can make, and the expenses that it's going to take versus the risk, the legal implications that you might have. The intangibles obviously are hard to replace, but it's becoming the norm, and it's meeting people's expectations going forward. This form of screening, and the legal implications, as we've all discussed today. Which is in alignment with the EEOC's guidelines, that if this is done right, it can be very effective. And so overall, it seems like it's going to be the way of the future, and the legal risks don't appear to be that strong. So.
Thanks, Jared. Paul, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I'm going to leave you with sort of a real life example. You have a person who can, who can take phone interviews and who's been doing phone interviews, and they are time consuming. And when you change that to video interviewing, what I've seen from a lot of people that I work with, the companies that I've worked with, and that you can watch at least 3 times more video interviews than you can doing the telephone interviews. You aren't getting distracted. You can put that into a 1 or 2 or 3 hour chunk of your day. You're not fielding calls whenever, or having people leave you voicemails. It keeps that whole back-to-back, bouncing around thing from happening. You end up getting through more interviews. You end up screening more people. You have better legal protection. Everyone that I've talked to that has made the jump has been happy about it.
Great, Paul. Thanks. And Caleb, last but certainly not least, what are your final thoughts related to our discussion today?
Sure. I'm actually going to discuss one little issue and then one kind of best practices, I think. I think that there's an issue with the whole pre-recorded video interviewing. I think some people have the idea of a person, you ask an innocuous question, please tell me about yourself, or something like that, and then why did you select this field? And then the person starts going on an answer down a trail you don't want to go down, right? In a live interview, I think that it's pretty easy to cut that person off. But one thing you give up with a pre-recorded answer, pre-recorded questions, is there's nobody there to cut that person off. So the person may get into, well, I selected this field because of my religious background or because of, some other protected category of my national origin or race. So I think that one kind of practical solution, I don't think it's really practical to have a person, have an HR manager pre-screen all the interview responses before sending them to the decision makers. But I think I think a lot of the software has the ability to maybe have an introductory comment in it where you can tell the person that, we're doing this interview, we have an EEO policy that, we don't discriminate based on these categories, and then we ask that these answers that, these kind of issues be avoided, or kind of some way to get at that so that you're really, since you're giving up that ability to cut somebody off when they're doing the video responses, but maybe you kind of direct them down that road or at least not to go down that road during the interview responses.
That's a great point.
Okay, Caleb, thanks. Look, we've received a number of other questions. We're not going to have time to field them all, but we will actually post the questions and some answers, and we're going to keep our panelists, and we'll forward the questions to the panelists. We'll gather their insights as well. And I just want, as a note, I just wanted to clarify that the panelists, and again, Jared, Paul, and Caleb, thank you so much for joining us. You've done a really remarkable job today, and we certainly appreciate it. And in no way are the panelists either associated or affiliated with InterviewStream, so we wanted to get a true objective overview of this topic, because we think it's hugely important not only to the industry in general, but to specific clients who are looking at trying to really understand how to best utilize potentially this technology to help them secure talent in an increasingly competitive marketplace. So again, panelists, thank you so much for your time. You've been most insightful. We want to certainly thank all the participants who joined us today. We will follow up with you, and we are offering the free trial related to the use of video messaging. We'd love you to see that platform if you get a chance. We'd like to have it free charge. There's no obligation at all. Try it. We think it's a huge change. Yeah, as you know, messaging has really taken shape on the consumer side. We have not seen a real big adoption curve on corporate America, so we think there's some real strategic growth there. Again, we'd like to thank everyone for joining. Make it a great day, and we'll see you out there and hopefully in a video at some time soon.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thanks, guys.